everybody. We had intended on giving our recap of the CSW conference in person to different groups that were interested in hearing from us. But because of the current COVID-19 situation, we are giving our virtual update experience for everyone to view at their leisure. So welcome and enjoy.
Today, we will go ahead and begin with a quick introduction.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Beth Blissman. I've been fortunate to serve for just over 3 years now as the United Nations representative for both the Loretto Community and the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Dubuque, Iowa. Grateful to be here with all of you today.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy Maltz. I'm the Assistant UN Representative for the Loretto Community, so I work with Beth, and I am also part of the Loretto Volunteer Program and very excited to speak about the experience of the CSW this year.
I'm Sister Roberta White, BVM sister and rep from our BVMs. This is my third year also. To be with the Lorettos at the UN in New York City. And it has been a tremendous experience with Beth and the group and for the last 3 years. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bridget Goldbeck. I am a friend of the Blessed Virgin Mary Sisters here in Dubuque, Iowa. I work as an attorney. And this was to be my first year attending CSW. I was looking forward to it. I still had a very memorable experience, even though it wasn't what I was expecting.
Hey everyone, I'm Janine Pitas. I'm also a friend of the BVMs, and I also live in Dubuque, Iowa. Bridget was my roommate, and this was also to be my first CSW. I work at the University of Dubuque. I'm a professor of English and Spanish, and I'm also on the board of Dubuque for Refugee Children and do translating and interpreting with immigrants to Dubuque, mostly from Guatemala.
My name is Rosemary Meyer. I'm a Sister of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and I had the privilege of being one of 3 BVMs who attended the conference 25 years ago in Beijing, China. And so I am so delighted to hear the stories of people who were hoping to attend, and actually I was hoping to attend this one in New York as well. So it's wonderful to see the connections and how they really are related to one another, the gifts and the challenges we have as women.
I'm Sister Irene Lucfour. I'm a BVM who resides in Dubuque. And I was very eager to go to the United Nations CSW. I must say that although it was an abbreviated experience, it was one that was very, very enriching, and I was so grateful to be there.
Next, we would like to show a short 5-minute video tour of the UN.
I'm visiting the United Nations headquarters in New York, and you are invited. You'll quickly learn how to get in and follow me on a rare tour of this historic landmark, including many of the famous chambers and the hidden gems. Located in the Turtle Bay neighborhood of Manhattan, on the spacious ground overlooking the East River, is home to the headquarters of the United Nations. Although it is situated in New York City, the land occupied are technically extraterritorial. The property is originally a smaller house, and the current complex was constructed between 1948 to 1952 from the land donated by the Rockefeller family. But let's get inside the center of the world politics. The first floor main foyer is accessible to everyone free of charge. It features portraits of the former Secretary General, artworks, and various exhibits. However, the official tour is expensive. So I'm going to pay up and share with you the experience of roaming through some of the rarely seen corners of the United Nations headquarters. Our first stop is a chamber that houses the UN Security Council, a gift from Norway. It was designed by a Norwegian architect with a mural also painted by Norwegian artists. The UN Security Council is one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations. It is the only UN body with authority to issue binding resolutions to its member states. Its responsibility includes maintenance of international peace and security, as well as accepting new members to the UN and approving any changes to its charter. Going to our next room, we walk through the hallway decorated with exhibit, placing emphasis on the importance of peacekeeping missions in the conflict areas, protecting of human rights, the remembrance of Holocaust, and the statehood for Palestine. The next chamber where the visit houses the UN Trustee Council is another principal organ of the United Nations with a mission to ensure those territories were administered in the best interest of their inhabitants and of international peace and security. Its main goal is to oversee the decolonization of dependent territories, which is fulfilled on November 1st, 1994. As a result, the Trustee Council suspended its operation on the same day. Although under the United Nations Charter, it continued to exist on paper. Today, the chamber is used as a general purpose meeting and conference room. Our next chamber houses the United Nations Economic and Social Council, another one of the 6 principal organs with the responsibility of coordinating economic, social, and related work of 15 UN specialized agencies. The building is full of artwork gifts from governments around the world, including this one given by the United States titled Rockwell's Golden Rule: do unto others as you will have them undo to you. This 15-foot teak and gold replica of Thai Loyal Birch was a gift from Thailand, and as well as this Buddha's bell tower. This artwork is called Chernobyl, a gift from Belarus. The left represents the region's past, the center highlights the nuclear disaster, and the right expresses the hope for the future. Leading the hallway to the last chamber is an exhibit focused on disarmament. It features an arms expenditure clock calculating the daily worldwide spending on weapons, as well as a resource comparison diagram showing the allocation of military spending in comparison to humanitarian and social costs. On display includes showcasing the horrors of landmines inflicted on its victims and the danger of weapons of mass destruction. Also on exhibit, the statue of St. Agnes found in the ruins of Roman Catholic Cathedral in Nagasaki, Japan in 1945, one of the 2 cities that was destroyed by the atomic bomb. The last chamber with the visit is the most famous and well-known, the UN General Assembly, another one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations, and the only one in which all member nations have equal representation. It's the main policy-making and representative organ of UN. Its power includes overseeing the budget of the United Nations, appoint a non-permanent member to the Security Council, receive reports from other parts of the United Nations, and make recommendations in form of General Assembly resolutions. And that concludes our tour.
You've already heard us use the term, the acronym CSW, several times. Welcome to United Nations Speak. CSW stands for the Commission on the Status of Women. It is one of the many commissions within the United Nations that nation states, i.e. governments, belong to, that make decisions that then will go in front of the General Assembly of the United Nations. The first session of the Commission on the Status of Women was back in 1947. And most years it is consisting of 44 different member states in representative numbers from the 5 different regions of the United Nations. The Commission's work is incredibly important and includes drafting international legal instruments like the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, commonly called CEDAW, CEDAW. You'll hear more about that later. And then also creating global normative and policy frameworks, such as the Beijing Platform for Action. You'll hear more about that later as well. And even though it's been 25 years since the Beijing Platform for Action, it is still the most progressive international policy framework for women's and girls' liberation to date. On a typical year, we would welcome a large delegation of Loretto and BVM folks to New York City. This, for example, is a photo of just about 2/3 of our delegation from last year. You may recognize some BVM folks in there. So we were expecting this year in 2020 for the 64th Commission on the Status of Women gathering, we were expecting a delegation of over 40 people. However, because of coronavirus, we were only able to welcome 4 folks from the BVM community, 2 of our Loretto volunteers, and 1 other Loretto co-member. So we were a small but mighty group. What happened this year was that the Commission on the Status of Women, which is typically a 2-week event, it was condensed into simply 1 half day on Monday, the 9th of March. So it certainly is not what we expected for this year, but we are deeply grateful that we were able to do a quick pivot and still have a marvelous experience. Thank you.
To be born a girl these days in Mexico is a death sentence. These words from Carolina stabbed my heart with sorrow as she described the rampant violence against women without much consequence. Because of the tremendous violence in drug cartels, because of the corrupt government authorities in Mexico, these violences continue with little consequence. And nevertheless, Carolina is going back to help and aid and to help people in the situations as she was, to help them move above this, to gain support. And that was so impressing and inspiring to me, that this young woman would be willing, after such difficulties, to go back. Secondly, we met 2 young women from Mozambique, Lyria and Marlene, 17 and 19. They had been helped by the Grail Catholic in Mozambique to gain an education and to rise above the situations that they had been involved in. And the 2 of them told 2 stories. They told a story about a 12-year-old who had been sold in marriage to a man more than 35 years her senior. And after experiencing tremendous abuse, she did escape. And she found the shelter that the Grail had, and has been gaining in her education and helping others. Also, Marlene told a story of a girl who ran away from home at 14 because of abuse and had become involved with drug and prostitution on the streets. But this young woman found help and aid in the Grail also. The 2 of them then held hands and told us these 2 stories about these 2 girls. They are our stories. They want to even graduate from high school and go into college, which is amazing. And they want to go back and also help other girls in these situations that they are in, to help other girls move beyond the abuse that they have and the violence that they have experienced. These young women are an example to me of young women today in the forefront of transformation for gender equality and safety. And they will create new and improved paradigms for women of our world, our entire world. I hold each one of these young people by name and in my heart. And the experience that we had, we were so blessed to have that Beth arranged for us, of meeting like 2 full days with these young women, to get to know them by name, to be able to call them friend and keep them in our heart. So this situation from the summer with the COVID cancellation was difficult and unfortunate. However, we were very blessed to have a very qualified and deep meeting with these young people. That is a lasting impression upon me, particularly. Thank you.
So going off what Roberta said, I also was very fortunate to attend the Sunday meeting at the Grail House, which happened to be International Women's Day. And it was the most special International Women's Day that I have ever experienced and probably ever will in my lifetime. I was hesitant to still attend or to travel to New York, you know, with the circumstances and the fact that the majority of the CSW had been canceled, but I was certainly not disappointed to sit in a small room with so many empowering women, both younger and older, was such an incredible experience, and isn't something I think we could have experienced if we had attended the conference as planned. Listening to both Lyria and Marlene speak about child marriage and the abuses they had experienced in their short lives was overwhelming, and I was just overcome with emotion. And so I was just admired how brave they were to share their stories, even in such a small group that we had. And it was special, as Roberta said, to get to know them throughout the week, just to see them later in the week, and they would smile, and we were still hugging back then, and just to see them be, you know, recognize us, and as Roberta said, you know, to think of us as friends was such a powerful experience. And later in the week, we got to observe a couple more presentations at the Salvation Army, and to see those two young women specifically listen to other young women who had come from similar situations and have had success, to see Lyria and Marlene you know, listen to those stories and just to see their reactions was such a great experience that I don't know that we could have had if the week had gone as planned. Along those same lines, we got to have, I think, deeper conversations, more in-depth conversations with women from all over the world, and I'm very grateful for that experience. So these were just a couple shots I snapped the day we were for International Women's Day, and the reason I shared this open house schedule was to show that it was a very informal and impromptu kind of day, but it ended up being the most special experience I've had in a long time. So, you know, although it didn't go as we planned, it was the best way to spend that day.
Great. So I will start by just adding to what has already been said about the strong impression made by these two young women, Lydia and Marlene from Mozambique. I think just because the immensity of the hardship and the trauma that they have been through, and the way that they have managed to find a new chance, a way out through education, it really speaks to the power of education, and especially education of women, and the UN's mission for this, for women and girls around the world. So as someone who is an educator myself, right in Dubuque, I just am really taking from their story the necessity to kind of translate that experience. You know, there's the old cliche, think globally, act locally. So to bring that to my own students, many of the students that I work with have come from difficulties of their own, especially coming from both urban and rural poverty, and they're really looking at the University of Dubuque as a new chance, a new way to start. Same thing, some of the young people, but especially the women that I've been involved in working with from Guatemala who moved to Dubuque. We had one graduate from high school last year, another graduate from high school this year, and it's just so clear that they're the first generation, and they're the first person in their family to graduate from high school in both cases of these young women. So they've also been through difficulty, and it's not as extreme as the hardship of these two young ladies from Mozambique, but just to see the power that education has to make a difference in people's lives, especially girls and women's lives, was really powerful for me. And it's just a story that I would like to continue to share and communicate, I hope in the future, to attend the CSW in a post-COVID world and bring students with me to experience it. And on that note, I just want to add that for me, it was also very powerful to visit the UN itself, as you saw in the video there, to see the buildings, the art, the General Assembly, the Security Council, to just walk through those halls on the last day that tours were allowed before COVID really put a stop to things. And for all of the I think that the UN has at times been involved in certain controversies. It's received certain criticisms, but it really does a lot of good in the world. And to me, it does stand as a civil society organization. It's a symbol for what the world could look like if we can get beyond our nationalist divisions, which seem so pronounced now. And it's been 3 months since we came back, a little more than that. But two things that have happened on a really global scale. One is a horrible thing, COVID-19. But I do think that there's a potential there for global solidarity among all of us throughout the world experiencing this thing together. Obviously, it's a very different experience depending on whether you're from a position of privilege or not and where you are in the world. But that's one thing we've seen. And the other thing we've seen, which again came from something tragic with the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, but this global anti-racism movement has been so powerful. And I don't know, I sent that postcard. We sent postcards from the UN on the last day that they could be sent. And a friend of mine who got it said, wow, this seems like a letter from another world, right? Because everything changed right after that with COVID-19. But I just really took away from this trip, in a time when there's so much negativity and so many horrible things happening, just a real vision of hope embodied in not just the young women from Mozambique, but the ones from Mexico and other places in Africa whom we met as part of this experience. So I'm so grateful to have been able to be part of it, even if in a limited way.
Well, as you can tell, even though the week was very abbreviated in all of the activities that we were able to experience, it was indeed a very enriching experience. For me, it was very touching that as I reflected on the week, that of all of the activities or excursions that we had, I could see and feel how our BVM life and mission was very, very present. Our congregation of BVM sisters have the core values of charity, justice, education, and freedom. And we have taken corporate stances on many social issues. So I just want to share just maybe 3 or 4 examples of how I felt the presence of our BVM core values. As everyone has related so far, we were all impressed by the 2 young women from Mozambique. And as they were talking, it occurred to me that that they were abused as young women, that the one who was forced into prostitution was probably a victim of human trafficking. And I know that there are Catholic sisters and many others throughout the world who are trying to raise awareness about the plight of human trafficking. We have I'm a member of the Tri-State Coalition Against Human Trafficking and Slavery in the Dubuque and Wisconsin area. And it is our goal to try to educate people and raise awareness of trafficking so that we can eradicate it or advocate for the victims. And that's what I was thinking when I listened to the two women from Mozambique. When we were having the tour of the church building, it was rather empty that day because no one, I mean, so many people were working at home. But we did have the wonderful privilege of talking to David, who is an advocate for Amnesty International. And I think our conversation was very spontaneous. I think it lasted about 45 minutes. And we told lots of stories, talked politics, etc. But the thing that I was impressed with, I happened to get regular emails or mailings from Amnesty International asking for my signature on postcards or letters or petitions. And so I try to at least do that much. And when David was talking, he really stressed the importance of those signatures, because when prisoners throughout the world who are imprisoned unjustly receive those letters, they are given hope because they know that they have not been forgotten. And then David went on to say that usually, that I don't know how frequently this is, but he did say that guards who see that some of the prisoners are getting hundreds of letters or stacks and stacks of postcards, they tend to treat the person with greater respect and dignity because they think, ooh, people know who this person is. I better be careful. And so that just, again, affirmed the fact how important it is as a simple gesture of writing a postcard and then sending it to a prisoner has an effect. This colorful picture here was taken at the Salvation Army presentation. And they must have had 60 colorful umbrellas on display. And when they showed two things, that umbrellas protect people from the rain and the storms, but when they're folded up the other way, they can catch resources and be very, very powerful aids for people in need. There were several women who told their stories about how hard their lives were and how important education became. And they really sang the praises of the Salvation Army, who had come to their rescue and provided opportunities of education and learning. We also had the opportunity to see some young dancers acting out the stories of the women who gave the presentations. And during that afternoon, we were asked to join 2 or 3 other people around us and then just share some of our insights. And it was there that I shared with one of the Salvation Army personnel and another young woman who I think was from Uganda. And I told them how important education is to our BVM community. And we have had for a number of years a BVM community scholarship program. And we have been able to provide probably hundreds of scholarships to women in the United States, many in Ecuador, many in Ghana, West Africa. And they were very impressed by what we have done. And they said, that is so important, keep it up. So I know that every time we get a listing of all of the women who have received scholarships, it's really impressive that even though many of us are no longer in the classroom, we are still stressing the importance of education. On one of our free days, I think it was probably one of the few days that we got out, Bridget and Roberta and I took a ferry over to Staten Island. And it was so touching to pass the Statue of Liberty. And I thought about, what it says about give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses to be free. And I think about another corporate stance that BVMs have had, and that is to work for immigration reform and to be mindful of the refugees who are wanting to come into the country, and how important it is that we continue to work for immigration reform because there are still millions of people huddled masses yearning to be free. When we got into the harbor after being on the ferry, Roberta said to me, Irene, this is where our first sisters landed when they came from Ireland in 1833. And I was very touched by that. And then I remembered what happened as the sisters were disembarking from the ship. One of the sisters who was carrying the purse with their money in it, something happened and the purse opened up and all their money landed in the ocean. So they arrived in New York penniless. The person who said they would meet him never showed up, so they felt abandoned. They must have been frightened. They didn't know the language. But they did realize that they had each other. And as we continue to go through the difficult days of today with the pandemic, with racism, etc., BVMs have a quote from our foundress who says, as long as we are working unitedly, God will aid us as in the past. And that has proven true. This other picture is after I arrived, even before I was headed back to Dubuque, I got a call from one of our vice presidents, and she said, Irene, when you come home, we don't want you to go back to your apartment. You need to be quarantined. So Roberta and two other sisters who had traveled and myself were quarantined for, it was going to be 14 days, but it only turned out to be 8, which seemed like it was 14. But one of our sisters received this T-shirt from one of her nieces or nephews. And so we were in quarantine and we were very, very grateful to be released after 8 days. But being in quarantine helped me to think about all of the people who are imprisoned unjustly, all those who have no choices about getting out to the fresh air, no place to go. So anyway, I would, as I said in the beginning, even though our week was not exactly what we expected and the activities were very, very abbreviated, nevertheless, thanks to Beth and Amy and so many of the people who we met, it was really a wonderful, wonderful, enriching week. Thank you.
I was privileged to attend the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women, which was held in Beijing 25 years ago. So to get connected with people again this time, and actually planning to go to New York for this year's conference, which of course, as you have heard, was changed because of the virus, it gave me an opportunity to really reflect on and to draw back all these wonderful memories from the conference 25 years ago and to see how that is going into the future, not just for the present, but into the future. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to share. Lucy Maud Montgomery, who's a woman from Canada, wrote, "There is so much in the world for all of us if we only have the inner eyes to see it, and the heart to love it, and the hand to gather it to ourselves." So this quote for me describes what I experienced really at the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, and is still essential now and into the future. Every step was a feast as we walked from one place to another on the huge grounds where the conference was held. Cultural dancing and singing, artistically designed treasures for sale by women who had created these native arts, large and small groups of women giving lectures and presentations, workshops, women learning from each other, the mixture of the ages of the women there, the sight and smell of the moon cakes, because it was this big feast time in China. The joy of a drink of water from a well-worn water bottle. A group of Chinese women, each of them carrying a very large purse that was made in the United States. And the proud smiles on their faces as they showed me, each of them opening up their purse to show me the many pockets in the purses. These obviously were new purses because they couldn't find anything. They didn't remember which pocket they put it in. But it was such a connection between their lives and our lives. And they were so excited about these purses. They never had anything like that before. So how could we really, to go back to the quote from Lucy, how could we really not love the women who were attending this global gathering? They spoke in many languages, dressed in many colors and styles, acted for justice in their own cultural contexts, and all of us were very empowered by just being with each other, just being in the presence of each other. Our hearts filled with gratitude for the women present and for the United Nations that really brought all of us women together. So our hearts ached because of the injustices and the inequities, especially impacting women from across the world. But our hearts also rejoice for the creativity and the imagination and both the individual and the group wisdom that was shared in order to birth a more accepting, just, and joyous world. So with our hands stretched across continents, near and far, we were reaching out to share the wisdom of each other's gifts and to rejoice in the power of acceptance, the beauty of diversity, and the strength of hope for a more equitable world for future generations, particularly of women. So for me, this event was enriching, joyous, and hope-filled, and really relevant for not only the day that it was happening, but really for today and for decades still to unfold. Thank you.
Okay. So at this time, Sister Irene did such a wonderful job of speaking about the group's visit with Amnesty International already. So just quickly before I move on to some important frameworks and action steps, I just want to quickly show this picture that was taken with the group at the Loretto at the United Nations office building, which is called the Church Center of the United Nations. This is also where the Amnesty International office is in New York as well. They share a floor with us. So not only is David, who you can see in the back there, one of the senior advocacy advisors for Amnesty, is also an office mate of ours. So we feel really lucky to get to interact with NGOs big and small as we pursue global advocacy work at the UN. I also just want to take a moment to speak a little bit about some frameworks that Beth mentioned right at the beginning of our presentation, and just add a little bit more detail to them. One very important framework that is really guiding a lot of the work at the United Nations right now is the SDGs, which stands for the Sustainable Development Goals. You can see the graphic of them that's on the right side of the screen. There are 17 different goals that have been adopted. They were adopted by UN member states in 2015 to have a set and clear blueprint for peace, for people and the planet, for our future. What is especially special about these goals is that the ultimate end goal is to accomplish all of these goals by the year 2030. Accomplishing all the goals that you see on this graphic by the year 2030 is a pretty big call to action, and it's a pretty big undertaking as well. And so that is why so much of the work that we are grounded in is really framed by the Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, you can see Sustainable Development Goal number 5 is gender equality. And so by participating in the Commission on the Status of Women each year, we are working not only towards gender equality, but towards all of the intersections that gender equality brings up, and really covers so many of the other Sustainable Development Goals as well. Another framework that Beth spoke about was CEDAW. So CEDAW is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. As it says on the screen, it was adopted in 1979 by the General Assembly, and it's described as an international Bill of Rights for women. So again, so much of our work that is framed by the Sustainable Development Goals was really undergirded by conventions and other frameworks like CEDAW and like the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action that Rosemary really saw the formation of. There are so many frameworks, this CEDAW being one of them, where women's needs and action against violence and discrimination against women is really centered. And everything kind of following that is, again, framed around the convention and is grounded in the goals and the needs that are outlined in this convention. So CEDAW overall defines what constitutes discrimination against women, and it sets up an agenda for action to end such discrimination. So this year's Commission on the Status of Women celebrated 25 years since the Beijing conference, which Rosemary spoke about, and also aimed to update and uplift not only what was said and put forth in CEDAW, but also what was said and put forth in the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which again is a blueprint for women's rights and gender equality in the future. Finally, as we're beginning to draw this presentation to a close, I want to take a moment and share some good resources and action steps for folks that want to be involved in future work and help us progress our global advocacy work and progress things like CEDAW and the SDGs and the Beijing Declaration and just the overall work of the Commission on the Status of Women and the United Nations as a whole. So a few things that we recommend are staying up to date by subscribing to mailing lists. The 3 that I have listed on the screen, there are links to each of them online that you can then sign up for the newsletters. So UN Women is one option. NGO CSW New York might be a less recognizable name, but this stands for the NGO, Non-Governmental Organization Committee on the Status of Women in New York. And they are a committee that organizes other civil society members to progress the work of the Commission on the Status of Women and provide really important up-to-date news and action items for gender equality work. And then finally, this is a little bit of a shameless plug, but Loretto at the United Nations also we have a newsletter as well that we would love for folks to sign up for. We detail ways that our community members can get involved and weigh in and just stay up to date and educated on what is happening at the United Nations. Another recommendation that I have is to attend virtual events and make your voice heard. So many events that have now become virtual and are open to the public. And a lot of the ways that you can find out when and where these events are happening, whether they're happening virtually or in person or on a website, is through the newsletters that I mentioned. You can also always watch UN meetings live at webtv.un.org. So we want to thank you so much for watching the presentation today and hearing so many of the wonderful takeaways of our BVM friends, and we hope everyone has a great day.